My parents spent my entire childhood telling me I'd never amount to anything. They laughed at my dreams, compared me to everyone else, and made sure I believed I would always fail. Years later, they walked into a corporate office asking to meet the CEO, never imagining the woman behind that desk was the daughter they had written off. What happened next changed every one of our lives. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Maren Whitlock, and I am 32 years old. I live in Chicago, and from the outside, my life probably looks calm and successful. People see my career, my apartment, and the confidence I have today, and they often think I must have grown up in a loving family that believed in me. The truth is very different. I wasn't raised with encouragement. I was raised with doubt. In my house, it always felt like I had to prove that I deserved to be there. No matter how hard I worked, it was never enough. My parents, Dorian and Celeste Whitlock, always found a reason to criticize me. If I brought home good grades, they would say the tests were probably easy. If I finished a difficult project, they would say anyone could have done it. They never celebrated my effort because they never expected much from me in the first place. At the same time, my younger brother, Keaton, was treated completely differently. He didn't have to earn the praise that was freely given to him. Even when he did the smallest thing, my parents acted like he had done something amazing. I remember sitting at the dinner table, listening to them talk about how bright his future would be while acting like I wasn't even there. It hurt more than I can explain because I kept hoping that one day they would notice me too. I wanted to hear them say they were proud of me just once. That moment never came. As I grew older, I started to understand that I couldn't change the way they saw me. The problem wasn't that I wasn't trying hard enough. The problem was that they had already decided who I was, and nothing I did could change their minds. That realization was painful, but it also planted a quiet promise inside me. I stopped chasing their approval and started focusing on my own future. I didn't know exactly how my life would turn out, but I made one promise to myself. One day, I would build a life that no one could take away from me. I would prove to myself that their opinions were not the truth. That promise became the reason I kept moving forward, even on the days when I wanted to give up. By the time I reached high school, I had stopped expecting compliments, but I still believed that real results might change something. I spent long evenings studying while other kids were out with friends. I joined extra classes, entered academic competitions, and applied for every scholarship I could find. My teachers believed in me and often told me that I had a bright future. Their words meant a lot because I rarely heard anything positive at home. During my senior year, all the hard work finally paid off. I received several scholarship offers from colleges in different states. I was proud because I knew how much effort it had taken to get there. For a short moment, I thought my parents would finally be happy for me. Instead, they acted as if it was nothing special. A few days later, I learned something that changed the way I looked at my family forever. My grandparents had quietly started a college savings account for me years earlier. They wanted to help me with expenses that scholarships wouldn't cover. I had no idea how much was in the account because my parents managed it. When I asked about the money, they looked uncomfortable. Then they admitted they had already taken it. Every dollar was gone. They had used my college savings to pay off Keaton's failed business idea. He had convinced them he could make quick money, but the business collapsed within months. Instead of making him face the consequences, they used the money that had been saved for my education. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I asked them why they would do that without even talking to me first. My father looked me in the eye and said, "Keaton has more potential than you. This was the better investment." My mother agreed without hesitation. I felt like the floor disappeared beneath me. I reminded them that I had earned scholarships because I worked hard, and that the savings had been meant for my future. Instead of apologizing, they accused me of being selfish. They said successful people didn't complain, and that families should always help each other. I wanted to ask why that rule only seemed to apply to me, but I already knew there was no answer. That night I packed a small suitcase and accepted one of the scholarship offers from a college hundreds of miles away. I didn't argue anymore because I finally understood that nothing I said would change their minds. The morning I left, there were no hugs, no tears, and no promises to visit. I closed the front door behind me with one clear thought in my mind. If I wanted a better life, I would have to build it without the people who were supposed to love me the most. Moving to another state felt like stepping into a completely different world. I had earned my place at college, but getting there was only the beginning. My scholarship covered my tuition, yet it didn't pay for everything else. Rent, books, food, transportation, and other daily expenses were now my responsibility. I quickly realized that every dollar mattered. During my first semester, I found a part-time job at a small coffee shop near campus. A few weeks later, I added another job in the college library during the evenings. My days started before sunrise and often ended long after midnight. I rushed from class to work, then back to campus to study until I could barely keep my eyes open. There were nights when I slept only 3 or 4 hours before doing it all over again. Some weeks were so difficult that I skipped meals just to save enough money for textbooks or rent. I never told anyone because I didn't want people to feel sorry for me. Many of my classmates lived very different lives. Their parents visited on weekends, brought groceries, paid unexpected bills, or simply called to ask how they were doing. Watching those moments made me realize what I had been missing. I didn't expect money anymore, but I still wished someone would ask if I was okay. Every once in a while, I picked up the phone and called home. A small part of me hoped things might finally be different. Instead, the conversations always left me feeling worse. My parents never asked about my classes or whether I needed anything. They questioned my decisions and said college was probably too difficult for me. They told me I would most likely quit before graduation because I wasn't strong enough to finish. At first, those words hurt. I would hang up the phone and sit quietly in my tiny apartment, wondering why believing in me seemed so impossible for them. But after a while, something inside me changed. Their criticism no longer made me doubt myself. It reminded me why I had to keep going. Every exam I passed, every bill I paid, and every problem I solved became proof that they were wrong. I stopped waiting for encouragement that would never come. Instead, I learned to celebrate my own progress, even if it was something as simple as making it through another hard week. Life wasn't easy, but little by little I became stronger. I learned how to solve problems without asking anyone to rescue me. I learned that strength doesn't appear all at once. It grows every time you keep moving forward, even when nobody is cheering for you. By the end of my second year, I no longer felt like someone trying to survive. I felt like someone slowly building a future with my own hands, one day at a time. Graduation day felt different from what I had imagined as a child. I didn't have family waiting to celebrate with flowers or take pictures after the ceremony. I stood with my classmates, smiled for a few photos, and quietly reminded myself that I had earned this moment. A week later, I packed my things again and moved to Chicago after accepting an entry-level position at a consulting firm that was growing faster than many people expected. I was the newest employee in the office, and I knew I had a lot to learn. Instead of trying to impress people with words, I focused on my work. I arrived early every morning, stayed late when projects needed extra attention, and volunteered for assignments that others avoided because they were too difficult or time-consuming. Whenever I made a mistake, I admitted it, fixed it, and learned from it. My managers noticed that I stayed calm, even when deadlines became stressful. Rather than complaining about problems, I looked for practical solutions. Over time, coworkers started coming to me when they needed help with difficult projects. I listened carefully, stayed organized, and worked well with different teams. Senior executives began inviting me into meetings because they trusted my judgment. Each new responsibility taught me something valuable, and every challenge made me more confident. A few years later, I received my first promotion. Then another followed. As my career continued to grow, people who had once trained me became my colleagues. Eventually, I was leading projects that affected the entire company. Some people were surprised by how quickly I moved forward, but they didn't see the years of quiet effort behind every success. I never felt the need to brag about my achievements because I wasn't trying to prove anything to strangers. Deep down, I already understood that no promotion or award would suddenly earn the approval I had wanted for so many years. That chapter of my life was over. During those years, I heard small updates about Keaton through relatives. He kept changing jobs, always convinced that the next opportunity would make him successful without much effort. Whenever something failed, my parents blamed his bosses, his coworkers, the economy, or bad luck. According to them, nothing was ever his responsibility. I listened without arguing because I had learned that some people refuse to see the truth, even when it is right in front of them. My energy was better spent building my own future instead of worrying about choices that were never mine to make. As time passed, I became known as someone people could trust. My career continued moving forward because I stayed focused on doing good work instead of seeking attention. For the first time in my life, I felt completely in control of where I was going, and that feeling was worth more than any praise I had once hoped to receive. Several years passed without hearing much from my parents. We rarely spoke, and when we did, the conversations were short and distant. I had accepted that this was simply how our relationship would always be. Then one afternoon, my phone rang while I was finishing work. I looked at the screen and froze for a second. It was my mother. I almost didn't answer, but something told me I should. Her voice sounded warmer than I remembered. She asked how I had been and said she missed me. A few minutes later, my father joined the call and spoke kindly too. It felt strange because I couldn't remember the last time they had spoken to me like that. Before ending the call, they asked if I would have dinner with them because they wanted to reconnect as a family. Part of me wanted to believe them. Another part of me felt that something wasn't right. Even so, I agreed to meet them the following weekend. We met at a quiet restaurant in Chicago. When I arrived, they greeted me with smiles that felt unfamiliar. They asked about my health, my apartment, and my work. The conversation stayed light for a while, but I noticed they never asked specific questions about my life. It felt more like they were waiting for the right moment to bring up something else. As dinner came to an end, my father cleared his throat and leaned forward. The friendly mood disappeared almost instantly. He explained that Keaton had started another business a year earlier. At first, everything seemed to be going well, but then the company began losing money. Soon the debts became larger than anyone expected. Creditors were demanding payment, and the situation had become serious. My parents looked worried, but they still talked as if none of it was Keaton's fault. They blamed dishonest partners, bad timing, and unexpected problems. Then my mother looked directly at me and smiled. She said she was sure I could help because I had a nice little office job. My father nodded and suggested that maybe I knew someone who could invest in Keaton's business or arrange a loan through my company. They spoke as if helping him was the obvious thing to do. Neither of them asked whether I wanted to be involved. They simply expected me to solve another problem that wasn't mine. I sat quietly for a few seconds, listening to every word. It finally became clear why they had suddenly wanted to rebuild our relationship after so many years. They hadn't come to know me better. They had come because they needed something. I stayed calm, smiled politely, and told them I would think about what they had asked. They looked relieved, believing they had convinced me. They had no idea that I already had a plan of my own. After we finished dinner, I didn't contact my parents for a few days. I wanted to think carefully before making my next move. I already knew I wasn't going to rescue Keaton from another bad decision, but I also felt it was time for them to see the truth they had ignored for years. At the end of the week, I called my father and told him I had looked into the situation. I said I couldn't promise anything over the phone, but it would be better if they came to my office the following Tuesday morning. He sounded pleased and quickly agreed. My mother thanked me several times before ending the call. On Tuesday, I arrived at work earlier than usual. Around 10 o'clock, the receptionist called to let me know my guests had arrived. I asked her to welcome them and send them upstairs. Later, she told me they had looked around the lobby with surprised expressions. The building was much larger than they expected. The company name displayed in the entrance clearly showed that this was not a small local business. They probably assumed I worked in one of the many cubicles on the lower floors. An assistant met them at the elevators and politely asked them to follow her. As they went higher and higher, my parents became quieter. When the elevator doors opened on the executive floor, they looked around with confusion. The hallway was calm, the offices were spacious, and everything looked professional. My assistant walked them to the largest office at the end of the hall and gently opened the door. I was already inside, sitting behind my desk while reviewing a report. I looked up, smiled, and invited them to come in. For several long seconds, neither of them moved. Their eyes traveled across the office before finally stopping on me. My father looked at the nameplate on the desk and then back at me as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. My mother slowly whispered my name, almost asking herself if this was real. I stood up, walked over, and shook their hands like I would greet any important visitors. Then I invited them to sit down. They looked completely lost. My father finally asked if there had been some mistake. I calmly explained that there wasn't. I told them they were exactly where they were supposed to be. This was my office, and I was the chief executive officer of the company. The room fell silent. Neither of them had a single word to say. The same people who had spent years calling my work ordinary were now sitting across from me, unable to hide the shock on their faces. For the first time in my life, they weren't looking down at me. They were looking up. My parents sat across from me, still trying to understand what had happened. My mother was the first to speak. She smiled nervously and said she had always known I would do well. My father quickly agreed and said they were proud of the woman I had become. Hearing those words should have made me happy, but instead I felt a deep sadness. They sounded like strangers trying to rewrite a story that I had lived every day. I leaned back in my chair and looked at them quietly. Then I asked a simple question. When exactly did you believe in me? They exchanged a quick glance but didn't answer. I reminded them of the night I learned my college savings had been used to cover Keaton's failed business. I told them I still remembered my father's words when he said my brother had more potential and that he was the better investment. My father's face tightened, but he stayed silent. I continued speaking, not with anger, but with honesty. I reminded them of birthdays that passed with little more than a quick phone call while they planned special celebrations for Keaton. I reminded them that neither of them came to my college graduation. They had promised to try, but they never showed up. I waited for them until the ceremony ended because part of me still hoped they would walk through the doors. They didn't. I told them about the dreams I shared when I was younger and how they laughed at them. When I talked about building a career, they said I was aiming too high. When I talked about leading a company someday, they acted like it was a joke. Every time I tried to believe in myself, they gave me another reason to doubt it. My mother quietly said they had made mistakes and that parenting was difficult. I nodded and said I understood that no parent is perfect. Then I told them that mistakes happen once or twice, but years of choosing one child over another is something different. I explained that every promotion I earned happened without their support. Every late night, every hard decision, and every success belonged to me because I walked through those moments alone. No one from home called to encourage me before important meetings. No one celebrated when I reached a new position. I built my life without the help I had needed most. The office became painfully quiet. My parents lowered their eyes and said nothing. For the first time, they realized that I remembered everything. I remembered the words, the disappointments, the empty seats, and the feeling of never being enough. I hadn't brought them there to embarrass them. I brought them there because I was tired of pretending the past hadn't happened. They wanted to ask me for help, but before we could talk about Keaton, they needed to face the truth about what they had done to me. After several minutes of silence, my father finally cleared his throat and brought the conversation back to the reason they had come. He asked if my company could invest in Keaton's business or help pay his debts before everything fell apart. My mother added that this was a chance for our family to come together again. I listened without interrupting. When they finished speaking, I folded my hands on the desk and answered as calmly as I could. I told them that I had already reviewed the information they shared about Keaton's business. The numbers were clear. The company had been losing money for a long time, and the problems were caused by poor decisions, not bad luck. Investing in a business with no solid plan would be unfair to my company, my employees, and every client who trusted us. I explained that I had spent years building a reputation based on honesty and responsibility. Every decision I made affected many people, not just me. I could not risk other people's jobs or money because someone in my family wanted another chance without accepting responsibility for past mistakes. My father looked disappointed and said family should always help family. I quietly replied that real help is not the same as rescuing someone from every consequence. If Keaton never learned from his choices, nothing would change even if someone paid his debts today. My mother asked if I was refusing because I wanted revenge. I shook my head. I told her revenge would have been using my position to embarrass them or make them feel small. That was never my goal. I had invited them to my office because I wanted them to understand who I had become, not because I wanted to hurt them. I wasn't saying no out of anger. I was saying no because it was the right decision. I wished Keaton well and hoped he would eventually find a way to rebuild his life honestly. But that journey had to begin with taking responsibility for his own actions. No successful business survives on excuses or special treatment. It survives because people learn from failure and make better decisions. I believe that lesson was more valuable than any check I could write. My parents looked at each other, but had no argument left. Deep down, I think they knew I was right, even if they didn't want to admit it. I stood up and walked them to the office door. Before they left, I told them I truly hoped things would get better for them. I meant every word. I wasn't carrying hatred anymore, because hatred only keeps old pain alive. I had worked too hard to let bitterness control my life. As the door closed behind them, I realized something important. The greatest victory wasn't becoming successful. It was reaching a place where I could make the right choice without letting the past decide it for me. A few weeks passed after my parents left my office. Life slowly returned to its normal routine, and I focused on my work without thinking much about that meeting. Then one evening my phone rang again. This time it was Keaton. We had not spoken in a long time, so I almost didn't answer. When I picked up, his voice sounded very different from the confident tone I remembered. He didn't ask me for money. Instead, he said he wanted to talk. We met at a small coffee shop a few days later. He looked tired and older than his age. After sitting quietly for a while, he admitted something I never expected to hear. He said our parents had spent his whole life protecting him from every mistake. Whenever something went wrong, someone else stepped in to fix it. He never had to face the results of his own choices, and because of that, he never learned how to solve problems on his own. Hearing those words surprised me, because it was the first time he had accepted responsibility for anything. We talked for nearly an hour. I didn't judge him or remind him of the past. I simply listened. Before leaving, he thanked me for refusing to rescue him because he finally understood why I had done it. Not long after that meeting, my parents began calling more often. Their conversations were different now. They were no longer asking for favors. Instead, they apologized again and again for the way they had treated me throughout my life. They admitted they had been unfair and said they wished they could change the past. I appreciated hearing those words, but I also knew that regret could not erase years of pain. I told them I accepted their apology because carrying anger forever would only hurt me. At the same time, I explained that forgiveness did not mean everything would suddenly return to normal. Trust takes years to build and only moments to break. Ours had been broken a long time ago. We slowly started speaking from time to time, but I kept healthy boundaries. I no longer felt responsible for fixing everyone's problems or meeting every expectation. My life finally had peace, and I wanted to protect it. My parents seemed to understand that. They respected my decisions, even when they wished we were closer. As the months went by, I continued leading my company and building the future I had worked so hard to create. Looking back, I realized that every member of my family had been forced to face a difficult truth. Some lessons came late, but they finally came. I couldn't change where we started, but I could choose how my own story would continue. That choice gave me something I had never truly felt before. It gave me freedom. As the years continued to pass, I found myself thinking less about everything that had happened and more about what I wanted my future to look like. I had spent so much of my life trying to survive difficult moments that I almost forgot how important it was to help others when I finally had the chance. At work, I started spending time with new employees who reminded me of my younger self. Some came from difficult families. Others doubted themselves because they had spent years hearing they would never be good enough. Whenever I noticed someone struggling, I shared my experience with them. I didn't tell them what to do. I simply reminded them that another person's opinion does not decide their future. Little by little, mentoring became one of the most meaningful parts of my career. Watching someone grow in confidence gave me a kind of happiness that no promotion or award ever could. It showed me that real success is not only about reaching the top. It is also about helping someone else believe they can get there too. Looking back now, I realized something I never understood when I was younger. My parents' lack of faith in me could have destroyed my future, but I refused to let it. Instead, it became the reason I kept moving forward when life became difficult. Every challenge taught me patience. Every disappointment made me stronger. I never wanted another person to feel as alone as I once did, so I chose to become the kind of leader who listens, encourages, and gives people a fair chance. The last time my parents visited my office, they walked away with a very different understanding of who I was. They finally saw the woman they had spent years refusing to believe in. They understood that I had built my life through hard work, discipline, and determination. No one had handed me success, and no one had carried me through the difficult days. I had earned every step on my own. That realization changed the way they looked at me forever. I don't know if our family will ever become completely whole again, and honestly, I no longer measure my happiness by that answer. My life is peaceful, meaningful, and filled with people who respect me for who I am. That is enough for me. If there is one thing I hope you remember from my story, it is this. Your past does not decide your future. The people who doubt you do not get the final word. Keep working, keep believing in yourself, and keep moving forward even when nobody is cheering for you. Sometimes the greatest revenge is not proving someone wrong with anger. It is quietly building a life they never believed you were capable of living.